Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel, and as the title of the video suggests, we are here to discuss the downfall of parkour in Assassin's Creed. Now, this is not a video particularly bashing the newer games. I simply feel like parkour hasn't been a mechanic because the approach has changed in the newer games. Now, are these newer games really good games? That is a more subjective thing, and my answer to that question is a no. But that is not the point of this video. The point is to sort of objectively analyze what happened to the parkour system in Assassin's Creed. Now, to do that, I will go through the various eras of Assassin's Creed. In interest of not making the videos like more than an hour long, I'm going to bunch together the games that are really in the same generation of games. So for example, Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelations really have the same engine and mostly the same mechanics. So they are going to be in the first category. The second category would be Assassin's Creed 3 to Rogue, where Ubisoft moved to the Anvil Next engine. And then we get Unity with the Anvil Next 2.0. That is another category because that's a huge step up. Then there is Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and I know many people might say, oh, they are the same system, but trust me, there's a reason why I'm putting it in a separate category. And then of course there is the modern trilogy from Assassin's Creed Origins to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. With Valhalla being sort of developed in a newer engine, it's called Ubisoft Anvil, but it's still basically the same Anvil Next 2.0 with some slight improvements. I don't really know what's going on there. But anyway, those are the categories. And now in these categories, it's not just enough to look at the parkour mechanics. Like mechanically, I could just stop at Assassin's Creed 1 and Revelations and say, mechanically, this is the best. But there's also something we do need to look at, which is the way these games were focusing and also the world design. That is something that really makes these things good. So those are something that I'm going to be discussing in this video. So now that this initial part is out, let's go to the first category, which is Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelations. Within this particular category, within this particular era of Assassin's Creed, I feel like parkour was more than just a gameplay mechanic. More than just a movement system. It is a very full-fledged gameplay mechanic. Like, you can just run around in the world and it is part of the gameplay, but it's not really a passive part. Like in the modern games, we have seen more and more that it's basically just a movement system. It's a system to climb things. It's a means to an end. You go from point A to point B. Parkour in this early iterations wasn't that. It was a completely separate gameplay mechanic of its own, which complemented the game. It did not exist to simply serve a purpose. It was the purpose. And now in that, there are various things that they did in the older mechanics that were really good. For example, parkour was extremely consistent. If you jump, you always follow that same parabolic arc like you are supposed to. There are wall ejects, side ejects. The level of control that the player has is ridiculously good. Now, I have seen a lot of people who say that, the controls are finicky and like this really does not work. Like, I always want to jump somewhere and the character goes some other way. And while some of that is true, it's not the fault of the parkour system. It's not the fault of the controls. It's not the fault of the mechanics. It's not even the fault of the design. I have played these games for so long and it took me a while to realize this. But the biggest culprit and the biggest reason why sometimes people tend to screw up in parkour in the older games is the camera. Because especially if you are seeing the sequence right now, I'll try to put the Assassin's Creed 2 sequence. You see, as we're jumping through, the camera constantly moves to the sides. Like it tries to give a more cinematic appearance, except it doesn't adjust the controls accordingly. So you need to compensate for the controls as well, which is why a lot of people ended up screwing it up. And I can completely understand why, because you have to you have to compensate for the camera movement on the fly. If you don't, then you jump in a very different direction. And with the amount of complexity this system had, it was very easy to screw up. But I would still say this is mechanically a very, very accomplished system. Like, I have not seen a movement system this good in pretty much any other game. Now, granted, many people have said that Spider-Man is a really good one, but I have never played the newer Spider-Man. I have only played the older ones. So I don't really know how good that system is or how good that system feels. So I'm just putting that out of the way. But in terms of the games that I have played, this is without a doubt the best movement system I've seen. And yes, I am including the flying system from Anthem in here, because while that was satisfying, I would still much rather have this. Now, I also said that world design plays an important part, and it does here. Like, if you see on the screen right now, it's not just about, going forward or going down. Like, if I freeze the screen right here, you can see there are 3 different layers for traversing. Like, for example, as you see right now, you can go forward or to the side. You can go down to the ground. Also, there's a 3rd layer there that you can, if you want to, you can jump into that layer. And it is just that with these options in the parkour system, with these options in the world, you always had at least more than one option when you were out there, climbing stuff or maybe running through stuff. So like this system gives more choice to the player than any other system ever. And in this regard, I would say Rome from Brotherhood is the best city for parkour. It is the absolute best, in my personal opinion. I would say Damascus comes in at a close second from Assassin's Creed 1. Now moving on to the next era of Assassin's Creed, that is Assassin's Creed 3 to Assassin's Creed Rogue. Now I'm not going to talk too much about the mechanics, because in terms of mechanics, Assassin's Creed 3 is all very, very similar to the games before it. Except it did 2 things that, in my opinion, are extremely stupid. One, we lost the grabbing ledge option. Now, I have accidentally triggered grabbing ledges sometimes in Assassin's Creed 3. I don't know if it's actually a feature, but even if it is, it doesn't really work. Now, mostly the game just detects an edge and kind of snaps you to it. So we lost that. And also there is another stupid decision, which is to combine the sprint button to the parkour button. So what happens is you just end up climbing everything, and that sucks. Like, you're just normally running, just a normal sprint, and you just climb stuff. This wasn't a problem in the previous games, because in the previous games, you had to press space to actually climb. You cannot climb by just running. So I don't understand why they took this decision. Maybe it was to streamline the process a bit, but I feel like the older games kind of nailed the controls themselves. But in terms of animations though, Assassin's Creed 3 has much better animations than the previous games, which is to be expected. It is a jump in engine. They kind of redid the entire animation system. They also added 3 running, so that's something that was new to the game. The game, I would say, is more liberal with its edge detection, and it does snap a bit to the edge. So like, for example, if you're jumping and you're just about to miss the edge, you may see that corner jumps a little bit farther just to grab that edge. So unlike in Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelations, where if you jump, you have a constant parabolic path for every single jump, here the path might differ just a little bit. It's not too bad. And in fact, I am fine with that, because sometimes you may make some sacrifices to kind of let the parkour flow a little bit better. So I like that. I personally do not have a problem with this. In fact, I'm going to go on a limb and say that this was the best parkour system in Assassin's Creed, because it had everything from the previous games. It added tree running, and if you just, ignore those 2 stupid decisions that they did take, this has the ability to be the best parkour system. But it is not. And that plays into the second point that I'm about to make, which is that this wasn't really designed for parkour. Like, especially in the cities, in Assassin's Creed 3, you can just see that the environments, yes, you can go through some very good sequences in parkour. Hell, like you can see in the background right now, I am using the parkour mechanics, and it works rather well. It's not like it doesn't work. It's just that compared to the older games, this is not as good. Now, of course, Assassin's Creed 4 and Rogue are also in this category, and they pretty much follow in the same vein. They have all the mechanics. It's just that you don't need them. You don't ever need them. Black Flag, I would say, kind of downgraded it a little bit, but that's more because obviously with Assassin's Creed 4 and Rogue, parkour was in the focus. In Assassin's Creed 3, you could see that the parkour in city wasn't really the focus. They added vaulting and stuff. That is fine, but it was more focused on the frontier and the tree climbing mechanics and the tree running. That was the signature feature of Assassin's Creed. And in Black Flag and Rogue, obviously, they focused on the ships and not really the parkour. So in this one, the mechanics are there, but as you can see, the world design don't really complement the mechanics as well as they did in the previous entries. Which is why, even though mechanically I would say this is better somewhat, it is still not the best system because it just isn't being supported by its design. Now we move on to the next era of Assassin's Creed, which was Assassin's Creed Unity. This is the game in which Ubisoft moved to the Anvil Next 2.0. They redid all the animations. Unity went back to the drawing board, and in my opinion, they achieved something fantastic. Now, Unity brought back some of the old elements of the parkour system, and it wasn't flawless. In no way is Unity flawless. It has a lot of flaws. But in its effort to modernize the mechanics, it does sacrifice a little bit in terms of the control and consistency from the other systems, from the older systems. Now, you remember how I said in Assassin's Creed 3, it doesn't always follow the same parabolic path. It does make slight adjustments to kind of, make the flow better. In Assassin's Creed Unity, those adjustments are very aggressive to the point where the same jumps, like if you are jumping, the same jumps will result in very different distances according to the context of where you are jumping to. Sometimes Arno might jump, say, about 2 feet. Sometimes he might jump 4 feet with the same input. And I feel like that sort of inconsistency should not happen. But then again, there are reasons why they kind of had to do that, and I'll get to that when I go to talk about the design. Now, side ejects were something that were pretty much removed from the game. Like, you cannot side eject in this game properly. Like, you can kind of side eject if you go down, but if you want to go up while side ejecting, the game kind of does it automatically because it just kind of lets you go to the left or to the right. It doesn't really let you go, do the wall eject to go sideways. So that is almost completely gone. At least back ejects were a thing, so that's good. But I would say the crowning achievement of Unity is the parkour up and the parkour down button. Now, as I said in Assassin's Creed 3, these buttons were combined. Unity had the sense to, disassemble that system. So now the sprint button is different, the movement walking button is different, and the parkour climb button is different. But there is another button added to the series. Now, you might remember in the older games I said that to come down, you use the puppeteering controls. Well, maybe that was not this particular recording. But to come down, you basically press shift on the keyboard or the offhand button in the controller in the puppeteering system. And what happens is that you sort of awkwardly, ledge grab things. So like you fall and you press it again to grab something. And so you kind of go down like that. Which is something I always found very weird. Like, you are not coming down elegantly, you are falling in style. Actually, you're not even falling in style. I just wanted to say that. I really wanted to say that. But no, the point is that that system was extremely clunky. And that is something that Unity improved upon. Like, you are not doing the staggered falling of the older games. Yes, there were some elements in the older games, like there is a way you can kind of do an animation that lets you smoothly go to the ground, but it doesn't work if you are going down from a steep building or from a vertical building. In Unity, you can go down a vertical building, you can still control the direction where you want to descend, and all of that while flowing really well. So yeah, in my opinion, that is the crowning achievement of Unity in terms of, adding to this mechanic, adding to the parkour system. Now, as for the world design itself, the buildings in Unity are farther apart than they have ever been. And so obviously, it's not as good as the older games in regards to that. Like in the older games, as I mentioned, there were several levels. In Unity, you can't really do that because the buildings are so far apart that it's not really possible to sort of bring them together and have sort of a flowing animation between them. So what they did to circumvent that is they added like ropes between the buildings. So in a way, that added its own, strategy element. So like if you want to stay in the rooftops, you have to look for these ropes. Like say I want to get from point A to point B. How do I get from point A to point B without touching the ground? That is something you can do in Unity. So I feel like the approach that Unity took was fundamentally different from what we saw in the previous entries. And that is why, at least for me, this design works as well, because you are not going to have a very densely packed city in every single setting. But the way Unity handled it, I feel like this is the best way to do it. But then again, that's also my choice. You might still say that the older systems were better, and I don't really disagree with that. Now, that's Unity. But now we move to Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Now, I said before, there is a reason why this is a completely separate category. And I'm about to explain why this is a completely different category. Now, if you look at the various videos in YouTube, right? You look at Unity, you look at Syndicate, you look at the evolution of parkour videos, you will see that Unity and Syndicate look pretty much the same. Like, they have similar animations. Syndicate looks a bit heavier, which is something that is actually good, because in Unity you kind of, became Spider-Man. So that was good. But why is it that I'm putting this in a separate category? Because Syndicate truly marks the downfall of this mechanic in Assassin's Creed. And I feel like this isn't really talked about that much. On surface, as I've said, you might look at Syndicate and it looks the exact same. So what is the problem? But you could not be further from the truth. In fact, you could try, but you will not be successful. Side ejects were further removed, like now they just simply do not exist for the most part, and even back ejects were forcefully toned down. So now you can't even eject unless the game specifically allows you to. So like the game has put these barriers everywhere so that the player absolutely has no control. Like, this is the point where we really see this becoming more of a means to an end, rather than this being a gameplay mechanic in the game that you can actually enjoy and that you can actually, do stuff with. Like in Unity, you could actually make compilations. In Syndicate, it's so restrictive that it isn't even fun anymore. And also, yeah, you cannot go and you cannot wall eject unless you're a safe distance from the ground, which I feel is like, I do not agree with this babyfication of controls. I am really against these sort of mechanics where you are designing the game for 3-year-olds. And I don't like that. And more importantly, you cannot jump. You absolutely cannot jump in Syndicate. Why is this a thing? Why is it that we cannot jump in Syndicate when we could do that in pretty much every single game? And we even did that in Unity. We did that in Unity. We could jump in Unity. Why can't we jump in Syndicate? They are the same engine, pretty much the same mechanics with the similar animations. Why the hell can't we jump off? The rope launcher basically took away any need for a proper parkour system. The streets are wider than they have ever been. So I can kind of understand why they had to put the rope launcher, because putting ropes everywhere would kind of look weird, and the ropes would need to be a long distance because the streets are very wide. And also the structures are just so tall that, I can kind of understand why they had to go, with this setting. But I'm going to make a comment on that later on. But yeah, they definitely focused less on parkour. And while it did improve a few things, like I said, it improved the weight, and which was an improvement over the Spider-Man mechanics of Unity. But the severe downgrade in almost every single aspect signaled the big downfall of this once wonderful gameplay mechanic in Assassin's Creed. Now we move into the modern trilogy, which is Assassin's Creed Origins to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, this is not even a parkour system anymore, let's be honest here. Origins simplified the entire movement system to one button, which was an even stupider decision in my opinion than the thing that Assassin's Creed 3 did. But thankfully, at least it had the sense to keep the climbing button separate, so you know what, fine. But here though, I can't really talk about mechanics because there are no mechanics. You run with a single button and there is one to climb. Everything else is automated. Valhalla added a sprint button back, but that's just about it. Oh, and also they removed the parkour down button that the games before it had. It doesn't make sense. Why would you remove that? It worked perfectly well. But again, now the real talk here is the world design, because as I said, there are no mechanics here. Now going further back in time, Origins and Odyssey ran into a big problem. There wasn't much verticality in the map. Now I still feel like parkour could have been done better in like cities like Alexandria or Athens in Odyssey. But honestly, with how huge the world was and how flat it was, I get why this wasn't much of a focus. Like these settings did not focus on parkour because it didn't need to, because most of the world is flat. Now, should Assassin's Creed have gone to a setting where the world doesn't facilitate one of the biggest pillars of the franchise? That's a question you have to answer for yourself. My answer is obviously a big fat no. Because I don't feel like if the setting doesn't work with one of the biggest elements in your games, then maybe you should not go for that setting. But again, that's me, that might not be you. Now, moving to Valhalla though, because Valhalla did try to improve few things. Like Valhalla was set in somewhat modern times, and even in the world design, it was better suited to parkour. But Valhalla is objectively the worst parkour system in this franchise. Now, why do I say that? Now, in Origins and Odyssey, I said that the world was really flat. There was some verticality somewhere, but there wasn't really much to talk about. But that was not the case in Valhalla. In Valhalla, not only did they actually, design the world somewhat to work with parkour, they didn't change anything from the actual mechanics. Because the character is slower and heavier than even Origins and Odyssey, there are no mechanics, as I mentioned before, because underneath all of that, all of the systems that Valhalla improved, it is still the same mechanics that were being used since Origins. They only added a sprint button, which I guess did, improve the controls slightly. But even with that, it doesn't have that detailed control system that maybe Assassin's Creed Unity had or the older Assassin's Creed game had. So not only did it focus on the parkour system, it focused on the worst parkour system in the franchise. So when you are actually playing it, it just amplifies all the problems that this system has while we were playing. And that just makes it feel worse because it's using quite possibly the worst mechanics in this entire franchise, and it is focusing on it. But then again, that's the newer trilogy in my opinion. Now, to summarize what I've just said, the decline in parkour isn't how most people think it is. Like, I have talked to a lot of people and they just say like, oh, the older games were really good, then it sort of just went away. And Unity tried a little bit, but it didn't succeed. It's not really that. In my analysis of it at least, the parkour was good until Unity. It wasn't maybe the main focus, but at least the mechanics were there. And especially in Assassin's Creed 3, I feel like the series sort of went up, then sort of dipped in Revelations, then went back up in Assassin's Creed 3, dipped in 4 and Rogue, then went back up in Unity, and then it fell into a bottomless pit, never to return. In my mind at least, there is no doubt that parkour as a gameplay mechanic simply does not exist in Assassin's Creed anymore. Would I want a system like that back? Hell yes. And are we getting it? Hell no. Because if the objective of a game is to simply lay out a big flat map of nothingness, which is what we saw from the newer trilogy, then a mechanic like this will never be viable, because why would you put all of that effort into designing a proper parkour system when the game is actively dissuading the player from ever using it? Why on earth would anyone ever waste their time on a system like that? But if it were to return, I would love a system like Assassin's Creed 3. I feel like it's a good compromise between, the really cinematic nature of Unity and also the mechanical nature of the previous games. Just give the grabbing the ledge option, please, and also put the parkour down button from Unity, because honestly, after playing Unity, when I go to the older games and I don't have the parkour down button, it frustrates the hell out of me. So yeah, if you put the parkour down mechanic from Unity and you add the grab ledge option to Assassin's Creed, mechanically speaking, we have a winner here. But again, we ain't getting that, so there is no point. Anyway, so that brings about the end of this video. If you did like it, then consider pressing that like button. And also, I make videos like these all the time, so just go to my channel, check it out, and if you do like my content, then subscribe to my channel. And if you're already subscribed, then stay tuned for more videos. And also, thank you. I recently reached 115 subscribers. I got like 5 in a day. That is unheard of. So yeah, really thank you guys for that. And also, I will leave you guys in peace.